Ronna McDaniel is the chair of the Republican National Committee. Madam Chairwoman, good morning. Americans, as you know well, want to know when life is going to get back to normal. The president said this week we are rounding the final turn, but Dr. Anthony Fauci said it will be well into 2021, possibly the end of 2021 before that happens. So why not just level with the American people?
Well, I think you're talking about two different things. Dr. Fauci is talking about resembling life before the pandemic. I'm a Big Ten football fan. University of Michigan has an arena that's empty this year with 113,000 fans that usually come in to watch U of M. It probably is going to be a while till we fill in stadiums at the same level. But the president's talking about vaccines that are on the way, therapeutics that are ramped up, the fact that we've passed 100 million in testing, and then we're seeing the caseload go down as well.
Of course, just yesterday, 46,000 new infections were reported, more than 1,000 deaths. The death toll in this country is now approaching 200,000. The president, as you know, holds another rally in Nevada today. For months, he's urged Americans to follow the state and local guidelines that limit large gatherings, call for social distancing. So why is he putting his own supporters at risk and flouting those very state and local guidelines?
The president and the campaign are putting protocols in place to keep these attendees safe. There's temperature checks, masks are handed out. These venues are outdoors, and people are making decisions as to their own comfort level. And they're coming and saying, I don't have an underlying condition and I want to be at this. It's not very different than what we've seen with a lot of the peaceful protests that have happened around the country. Some of them turn not so peaceful, but we haven't seen the media really go after these protests. And this is a similar political speech. People want to get out and support their candidate, and health and safety guidelines are taking place.
Perhaps. I think a lot of people may see a difference between the president of the United States doing it and the protests, but I certainly take your point on that. Let me ask you about Bob Woodward's new book that made a lot of headlines this week, revealing that the president said one thing privately. He said that the virus is, quote, more deadly than even your strenuous flus, but said another thing publicly almost 3 weeks later, saying that the virus would go away and that it was just like the flu. So shouldn't the American people expect honesty from the president?
I think if you look at the actions of the president, they were very decisive, well ahead of anything the Democrats were putting forward as they were trying to impeach him. The president cut travel to China. The president created the coronavirus task force. The president brought in the private sector to ramp up testing, to make sure we had enough ventilators, enacting the Defense Production Act. The president moved at a rapid pace to fight a novel virus, something none of us had ever seen before. It took the whole world by storm. None of us understood the complexities of this virus. And as we've been learning more and more and more, obviously, we can make adjustments and do better things to protect the health and safety of the American people. And the president has done that. I do think it's responsible for the president not to panic the American people, not to come out and say, oh, the world's on fire, and have a run on the banks and have people running to the grocery stores and instilling fear. That is not what a commander-in-chief does. The president put a plan together to slow the spread. He gave daily briefings. He got the testing ramped up. All of these things have put us in a place now where we have more testing than any other country. We just bought 150 million tests from Abbott Labs that are self-tests that you can get a really quick response on. These are things that have happened in less than a year, which is remarkable. It's sad that it's politicized and not something that's bringing us together as a country.
Madam Chairwoman, let me ask you about that point. You make an important one there. The president said he downplayed the virus because he didn't want to frighten people. He didn't want to cause a panic. But during this campaign, he's repeatedly warned people that agitators and looters were going to overrun their neighborhoods. We're going to overrun the suburbs. So if the president isn't, I guess, sparking fear, why in those examples is he the one who's stoking it?
I don't think he's stoking it. I think we're seeing things on TV. You look at Kenosha, Wisconsin. It looks like a third world country that got burned out. I mean, it's really frightening to see businesses being burned down and looted, and Democrats failing to protect their cities. Look at Portland right now. I think this is a real unrest that we're seeing across this country. You know, if we have a difference of opinion, we can talk about it. But it's not okay to go burn down cities and burn down livelihoods and decimate police precincts, which you've heard some Democrats call for rioters to go do. I mean, this is not okay. And I think the president is ringing a warning bell that Democrats are not standing up to this type of violence.
Of course, the crime rates are going up in Republican-led cities as well. Tulsa and Miami, both led by Republicans, seeing their murder rates go up as well. Ronna McDaniel, chairwoman of the RNC, we appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.